Charles Edward Anderson Barry was an American singer, guitarist, and songwriter who pioneered rock and roll. Nicknamed the father of rock and roll, he refined and developed rhythm and blues and country into the major elements that made rock and roll distinctive. Some of his famous songs include
Maybellene, Over Beethoven, rock and roll music,
just let me hear some of that rock and roll music,
and Johnny B. Goode.
Born into a middle-class black family in St. Louis, Barry had an interest in music from an early age. Barry settled into married life and worked at an automobile assembly plant. Barry's lyrics focused on teen life and consumerism, and his music style included guitar solos and showmanship, making him a major influence on subsequent rock music. In 1953, he began performing with the Johnny Johnson Trio, influenced by Louis Jordan and by the guitar riffs and showmanship techniques of blues musician T-Bone Walker. By the end of the 1950s, Barry was an established star with hit records, film appearances, and a successful touring career. He even had his own nightclub, Barry's Club Bandstand. However, in 1962, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for violating the Mann Act for 18 months. After his release in 1963, Barry had several more successful songs, including No Particular Place to Go,
riding along in my automobile.
You Never Can Tell,
It was a teenage.
and A Rockin' Nadine.
I got on a city bus and found a vacancy.
However, these did not achieve the same success or lasting impact of his 1950 songs, and by the 1970s he was more in demand as a nostalgia performer, playing his past material with local backup bands of variable quality. Barry was among the first musicians to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on its opening in 1986. He was cited for having laid the groundwork for not only a rock and roll sound, but a rock and roll stance. Barry is included in several of Rolling Stone magazine's greatest of all time lists. He was ranked 5th on its 2004 and 2011 lists of the 100 greatest artists of all time, and 2nd greatest guitarist of all time in 2023. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll includes 3 of Barry's: Johnny B. Goode, Maybellene, and Rock and Roll Music. Johnny B. Goode is the only rock and roll song included on the Voyager Golden record. In May 1955, Barry traveled to Chicago where he met Muddy Waters, who suggested he contact Leonard Chess of Chess Records. Barry thought his blues music would interest Chess, but Chess was a larger fan of Barry's take on Ida Red, an old 1938 country song. On May 21, 1955, Barry recorded an adaptation of the song Ida Red under the title Maybellene, with Johnny Johnson on the piano, Jerome Green from Bo Diddley's band on the maracas, E.B. Hardy on the drums, and legend Willie Dixon on the bass. Maybellene sold over 1 million copies, reaching number 1 on Billboard magazine's Rhythm and Blues chart and number 5 on its best sellers in stores chart for September 10, 1955. When Barry first saw a copy of the Maybellene record, he was surprised that 2 other individuals, including DJ Alan Freed, had been given writing credit that would entitle them to some of the royalties. At the end of June 1956, his song Roll Over Beethoven reached number 29 on the Billboard's Top 100 chart, and Barry toured as one of the top acts of '56. He and Carl Perkins became friends. Perkins said that, "I knew when I first heard Chuck that he'd been affected by country music. I respected his writing. His records were very, very great." In late 1957, Barry took part in Alan Freed's biggest show of stars for 1957, touring the United States with the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, and others. He was a guest on ABC's Guy Mitchell Show, singing his hit song, Rock and Roll Music. The hits continued from 1957 to 1959, with Barry scoring over a dozen chart singles during this period, including the U.S. Top 10 hits, School Days,
Up in the morning and out to school.
Rock and Roll Music,
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music.
Sweet Little 16,
They're really rocking in Boston. in Pittsburgh, PA.
and Johnny B. Goode.
Deep down in Louisiana, close to New Orleans, way back up in the woods of...
Chuck Berry appeared in 2 early rock and roll movies. Rock 1956, in which he sang, "You Can't Catch Me and Go, Johnny Go."
I bought a brand new airmobile.
1959, in which he had a speaking role as himself and performed Johnny B. Goode. Memphis, Tennessee,
Long distance information, give me Memphis, Tennessee.
and Little Queenie.
Come on, Queenie, let's shake it. Go, go, go.
His performance of Sweet Little 16 at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1958 was captured in the motion picture Jazz on a Summer's Day. The opening guitar riff of Johnny B. Goode is similar to the one used by Louis Jordan in his Ain't That Just Like a Woman in 1946. Berry acknowledged the debt to Jordan, and several sources have indicated that his work was influenced by Jordan in general. When Berry was released from prison in 1963, his return to recording and performing was made easier, because British invasion bands, notably the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, had sustained interest in his music by releasing cover versions of his songs, and other bands had reworked some of them, such as the Beach Boys' 1963 hit Surfin' USA, which used the melody of Berry's Sweet Little 16. In 1964 and 1965, Berry released 8 singles, including 3 that were commercially successful, reaching the top 20 of the Billboard 100. No Particular Place to Go, a humorous reworking of Concerning the introduction of seatbelts in cars. You Never Can Tell.
C'est la vie, say the old folks. It goes to show you never can tell.
And a Rockin' Nadine.
Honey, is that you?
Between 1966 and 1969, Berry released 5 albums for Mercury Records, including his second live album and first recorded entirely on stage, Life at Fillmore Auditorium. For the live album, he was backed by the Steve Miller Band. Berry returned to Chess Records from 1970 to 1973. There were no hit singles from the 1970 album Back Home. But in 1972, Chess released a live recording of My Ding-a-ling, a novelty song which he had recorded in a different version as My Tambourine on his 1968 loop From Street Louie to Frisco. The track became his only #1 single. A live recording of Reelin' and Rockin', issued as a follow-up single in the same year, and was his last top 40 hit in both the US and the UK.
Sometimes I will, then again I think I won't.
Both singles were included on the Life Part studio album, The London Chuck Berry Sessions. Other albums of London sessions were recorded by Chess's mainstay artists Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. Berry's second tenure with Chess ended with the 1975 album Chuck Berry, after which he did not make a studio record until Rocket for Atco Records in 1979, which would be his last studio album for 38 years. Berry continued to play 70 to 100 one-nighters per year in the 1980s, still traveling solo and requiring a local band to back him at each stop. In 1986, Taylor Hackford made a documentary film, Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, of a celebration concert for Berry's 60th birthday, organized by Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, Etta James, Julian Lennon, Robert Cray, and Linda Ronstadt. Among others appeared with Berry on stage and in the film. Berry announced on his 90th birthday that his first new studio album since Rocket in 1979, entitled Chuck, would be released in 2017. His first new record in 38 years includes his children Charles Berry Jr. and Ingrid Berry on guitar and harmonica, with songs covering the spectrum from hard-driving rockers to soulful, thought-provoking time capsules of a life's work, and dedicated to his wife, Toddy. Rock critic Robert Christgau considers Berry the greatest of the rock and rollers, and John Lennon said, "If you try to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry." Elvis Presley covered Memphis, Tennessee, Too Much Monkey Business, Johnny B. Goode, and Promised Land. Jimi Hendrix covered Johnny Be Good. The Beatles covered Rock and Roll Music, Roll Over Beethoven and Memphis, Tennessee. The Rolling Stones covered Around and Around, Bye Bye Johnny, Carol, Come On, Let It Rock, Little Queenie, Talking About You and You Can't Catch Me. Jerry Lee Lewis covered Johnny Be Good, Sweet Little 16, Roll Over Beethoven, among others. Sandy Bull covered Memphis, Tennessee. The Beach Boys used the melody from Sweet Little 16 for Surfing USA and later covered Rock and Roll Music. Carl Perkins covered Roll Over Beethoven and Johnny Be Good. The Dave Clark Five covered Reelin' and Rockin'. The Electric Light Orchestra covered Roll Over Beethoven. Status Quo covered You Never Can Tell, Carol and Bye Bye Johnny. AC/DC have covered School Days. Bryan Adams, Keith Richards, and Dave Edmunds have covered Run Rudolph Run. Faces covered Memphis, Tennessee. David Bowie covered Around and Around. The Yardbirds covered Guitar Boogie as Jeff's Boogie. The Kinks covered Too Much Monkey Business and Beautiful Delilah. Buddy Holly covered Brown-Eyed Handsome Man. Lemmy Kilminster covered Life, many Chuck Berry songs. The Grateful Dead have covered Around and Around, Promised Land, Johnny Be Good and Let It Rock. And there are so many more bands and musicians who covered Chuck Berry's songs that would take so much time to write them down. On March 18, 2017, Berry was found unresponsive at his home near Wentzville, Missouri. Emergency workers called to the scene were unable to revive him, and he was pronounced dead by his personal physician. TMZ posted an audio recording on its website in which a 911 operator can be heard responding to a reported cardiac arrest at Berry's home. Berry's funeral was held on April 9, 2017, at the pageant in Berry's hometown of St. Louis. He was remembered with a public viewing by family, friends, and fans in the pageant, a music club where he often performed. He was viewed with his cherry red Gibson ES 335 guitar, bolted to the inside lid of the coffin, and with flower arrangements that included one sent by the Rolling Stones in the shape of a guitar. Afterwards, a private service was held in the club celebrating Berry's life and musical career, with the Berry family inviting 300 members of the public into the service. The night before, many St. Louis area bars held a mass toast at 10 p.m. in Berry's honor. Among the honors Berry received were the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1984 and the Kennedy Center Honors in 2000. He was ranked 7th on Time magazine's 2009 list of the 10 best electric guitar players of all time. Berry is interred in a mausoleum in Belair Garden Cemetery in St. Louis. I had the honor to see Chuck Berry 2 times live, 1988 in Greece and 2005 in Frankfurt, Germany. Rest in peace, Chuck, the father of rock and roll.